world out there, another dimension.
And these entities, they're set out to destroy your life, and you can let them or you can fight it.
She was exorcised, and voices came out of her that were not in any way her voice.
It's like a blacker than black whirlwind of energy.
So a really dark figure. The eyes really drew me in. So pitch black.
Took me and slammed me back to the bed on my back. In there, paralyzed. The chair with him moved back about 5 feet with him in it.
It started walking across the floor, and he said, beware.
Just remarkable. Things would fall right from the ceiling.
Going into a haunted house is like the last thing I want to do.
Demonology Today.
Demonology Today. Class is now in session.
Well, welcome to yet another episode of Demonology Today. I am Kenneth Deal. It's Wednesday, October 30th. On the air with me is my lovely wife, Sarah, and we have our guest online. And Demonology Today is your radio university of demonology studies, all to provide a better understanding of these show-related topics in spiritual warfare, parapsychology, demonology, as well as they apply to all demonic hauntings and ghost hauntings as well. We'll certainly try to keep it comprehensive for everyone, regardless of the faith, to a certain extent even universal. However, much of the topics, theology, theories provided are primarily of the Christian Judeo perspective. So we can move right on to our guest. And Sarah, you're with me, of course.
Yes, where else can I go? We really are excited. We want to welcome Dr. Bradshaw, actually from the state of Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Bradshaw. How are you?
Yes.
It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to be on your program tonight.
Well, we're very honored to actually feature the level of expertise in the theological, educational, and religious background that you have in demonology. And Ken and I already agreed we're not going to do too much talking because there's so much information that you have on this topic. I'm just going to kind of just interject a couple little bit of things here and there and ask you some questions. And maybe toward the end, if we have any time at all, we might try and squeeze in a question or two from the chat room. But I'm thinking we're just going to have you back, probably. So on that note, I will be quiet, and please introduce yourself. We have posted a brief bio about you, but I think you can better speak for yourself, Dr. Bradshaw.
Yes.
Well, I'm William Bradshaw. I graduated from the Divinity School of Yale University and went on to study at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I was honored to be able to study under Dr. Matthew Black. This was I went there in January 1961, and Dr. Black was the renowned scholar in Europe for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I went there with the intention of studying the Dead Sea Scrolls. But when I got there and met with Dr. Black and we were discussing what would be my subject of a study, he said, Mr. Bradshaw, they were very formal in those days and used last names. He said, Mr. Bradshaw, this is only 16 years after the end of the Second World War, and there are many very reputable scholars, especially in England and Germany, who are wondering if it is possible that demons were involved in some of the terrible atrocities of the Second World War, especially where the Jewish people were concerned. And he said, I would like you to study this subject. Well, coming from the United States in the early 1960s, the study of demons was, just wasn't done. And at first I thought Dr. Black was joking. But I found out that he was not a very humorous man on any subject, and certainly not on this one. And he was dead serious. And so I became the first, as far as I know, the first American scholar to approach the study of demonology not from not from some particular religious orientation, although I was an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ, but that was not where I was coming from. I was coming strictly to study the history of demonology. And as far as I know, at that time and for some time after, I was the only person in the United States and actually in the world for a while who had a PhD degree in demonology from an accredited and well-recognized university. There are lots of people with doctor's degrees in demonology, but not from accredited institutions. So that's how I got started in all of it. That's
a very important distinction, Doctor.
Well,
because the university that you studied in Scotland is not only respected and accredited, but it's been around for a long time. And most people who claim they have a degree in demonology, the credentials are sketchy at best.
Well, anyway, that's how I got started in the field, and I should say here in the very beginning, I'm not a practitioner. I'm not one who performs exorcisms or things of that nature. I am a historian of demonology. I have been present for exorcisms. I have performed one exorcism myself under unusual circumstances, but basically I am a historian of demonology and not a practitioner. So that gives you a brief introduction of myself.
We're going to be talking primarily about exorcisms, and I think the introduction brought us into who you are, and that's important because there's a big challenge out there for so many people trying to wear the title demonologist, which is the topic of next week's show. We're not going to get into it tonight, but thank you for your introduction, and I think we're just going to start with the basics. And let's ask the very basic question, what is demonic possession?
Demon possession would be the belief that a demon has actually come to dwell within a person and uses the person's physical body in order to do what the demon wants to. We must be clear here as to the definition of a demon. A demon is an invisible, evil spirit. I think of the demon as the opposite from the angel. You have God and his angels, and you have Satan and his demons. And so a demon is one of the invisible evil spirits that are part of the army or of the evil force of Satan. And we have to realize that when we're talking about demons or ghosts, any kind of a spirit, even God, we cannot prove the existence of a demon. We cannot prove the existence of God, of an angel. By the very definition of a spirit, it is invisible. You can't touch it. You can't smell it. You can't really have any of your senses that detect a demon or a good spirit, an angel, and so much depends upon one's religious orientation or one's religious faith or lack of faith. That's all part of it. And people say, well, how do you know whether or not there is a demon involved or an angel involved? Sometimes a human creature does something that is so absolutely, unbelievably wonderful that it's just beyond the realm of what the normal human creature would do. And you just know that there's been an angelic influence. And on the other hand, there's sometimes that you just scratch your head and say, how can the human creature be so vile and so awful to do something like this? And then you think that there are demons involved, and it's that last thought that brought the English and the German scholars into focus in the post-Second World War years, saying, how could any human creature be so inhuman as to treat the Jewish people as they were treated? And so this began to say, were there demons involved in this?
What were their conclusions, Doctor, in your study?
Well, the strange thing is that that's the area where I started, but actually Dr. Black said, in order to understand what is going on in the 20th century, we've got to trace the thought of demonology from the beginning. And so I became a historian of demonology, and I never did focus in on what happened during the Second World War. I can tell you that scholars have disagreed, and there are going to be some people who say, oh, yes, there were demons, and there were others who are going to say, no, demons don't even exist, and certainly it was Hitler and not some demonic influence that caused the atrocities to the Jewish people.
Now, go back then and start telling us. We were talking about exorcisms. And you were talking about possession. Can you continue to elaborate to that?
Yes, one of the most difficult things in determining whether or not there should be an exorcism is deciding whether or not a person is actually demon-possessed or whether a person is just being very human and being ornery and naughty and mean. And there's a lot of difference between just being really just mean and nasty and off and on doing things that you shouldn't do, or are you actually possessed by a demon? And so you get down to saying, well, how do you know? I can only tell you what my study has told me. And to give you just brief background, many people do not realize that every single exorcism that is authorized by the Roman Catholic Church, that there is a written transcript of what goes on in that exorcism. Sometimes they're called a transcript. Sometimes they are called a written diary of what has happened during the exorcism, and those go back for centuries. And so there are literally thousands of transcripts of actual exorcisms that have taken place. And as you study those, and you can say, well, where can I get a hold of them and how can I read them? They are locked away in the historical records of the Vatican, and they are in local dioceses for a while and then transferred to the Vatican. And you can get permission to read some of them under certain circumstances, and certainly a scholar studying demon possession can have access to a limited number of those. But as you study those, you begin to see what appears to be the characteristics of a person who is demon-possessed. So I will mention some of the physical and psychological characteristics that are typical of demon possession. But let me say, just because you may have one or two of these characteristics doesn't automatically mean, that person's demon-possessed because they have this characteristic or that characteristic. It means that these are typical characteristics, and if you have 2 or 3 of them, it is reason to look beyond to think that they're just being ornery or mean. It means that perhaps demon possession is at play, and that a person should get serious into looking into it. So let me go through some of these characteristics. Now, first of all, many children fall into the category of being demon-possessed, and this is a real fooler to many people. Usually a young child is seen to have bad behavior, and then they just get to be almost difficult, almost impossible to handle and to work with. So they take them to a therapist and then to a child psychologist and finally to a child psychiatrist. And the majority of those people do not believe in demon possession, though more and more are believing in it now than used to be the fact. And so they are not properly diagnosed, so they end up going on, they become ornery children, and then teenagers, they become more than ornery, they become very destructive and harmful. Many of them will end up on drugs and alcohol, and in order to support that habit or those habits, the women will tend to go toward prostitution, and the male creatures will tend to go toward crime and theft of one kind or another, and their lives are totally ruined. Now, let's go on to the adult. These are characteristics, and it's very interesting, and people will argue with me about this, and they can argue all they want, but the historical facts will definitely verify that more women are demon-possessed than men. Wow. And we can say, well, why is that? I'm not quite certain. I could give some guesses, and we might talk about that a little later, but that is a fact. There are more women that are diagnosed as being possessed by a demon than there are men. Now, what are the characteristics? Well, with a woman, you will notice in the early stages that they are very flirtatious, they are very pleasant, they are overly dramatic, and they are overly friendly with both men and women. Now, again, let me caution, just because somebody is you have a woman who's just a big flirt, or is very vivacious, doesn't mean that they're demon-possessed. This is only one of the characteristics. But let me run through the various characteristics that demon-possessed people appear to have. One of the strange things is that a person who is demon-possessed and being really bothered by the demon, just because you're demon-possessed doesn't mean the demon's going to bother you all the time. They're going to bother you, a demon's going to bother you part of the time, and when the demon is very active and has you upset and is using your body or your voice to speak through, all the wrinkles in a person's face will disappear, and their skin will be drawn tightly across their forehead and tightly across their face, so all the wrinkles disappear. A person who is demon-possessed will tend at times to go into a rapid-fire speech, just bang, 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 one word after another, but the words will be totally unrecognized. You will think that they are totally made-up words. Sometimes, and this is strange, but so many times has been verified, a person who is demon-possessed will have a working, speaking knowledge of maybe 2 or 3 foreign languages, none of which they have ever studied. But all at once, they're just able to speak a foreign language.
Wow.
They will also have knowledge of future events. And this is very interesting to me, and I became really involved and laughed at first and then questioned at some length afterwards. A person came to me who claimed having absolute knowledge that Robert Kennedy would be assassinated, where he would be assassinated, and how he would be assassinated. I said, well, how in the world do you know all of this? They said, I don't know how I know it, I just know it. And so I felt obligated to take this information further, and that person got into severe trouble, and I was questioned somewhat, but it happened exactly as this person told me.
Wow.
This unbelievable knowledge of future events. Also, a person who is demon-possessed will have a peculiar and exaggerated hand gestures. They will just be using their hands and waving their arms around, and accompanied with no apparent emotion. You know, sometimes when we're making a speech and we get all excited, then we will shake our fist or do something with our hands, but just without any apparent emotion, just all these exaggerated hand gestures. The average demon-possessed person will be haunted, literally haunted, by terrifying dreams of one kind or another. They will suffer depression, and migraine headaches are a very similar, is a very typical problem, and lots of people have migraine headaches, and just because you have a migraine headache and you're listening to this program tonight, don't say, oh my goodness, I'm demon-possessed. That is simply one of the characteristics. Another characteristic that is seen again and again is the unusual strength that a person will have who is demon-possessed. If they are in some type of an argument with a person, they become very strong, and if they get in a fight, it literally can take 5, 6, or 7 people to hold down a person who is demon-possessed.
Wow, so it's almost like they're
on
drugs or something?
Well, it's just a very strange thing to see this mild-mannered person who all at once gets in a fight, and nobody's able to hold them down, even though they may be rather small in physical structure. And then really this ties in with the last characteristic that I will mention, and that is how quickly a demon-possessed person can turn from being a very charming, very pleasant, delightful person, and just at the snap of the finger becomes mean, vindictive, nasty, uses vile language, and becomes dangerous. So those are the characteristics that you see as you study the various exorcisms that have been that have taken place through the centuries.
What is exorcism, and as opposed to what it's really not? Let's start with what's not an exorcism.
Thanks.
By
That's
your
a good one.
definition.
Yeah.
Now, you've already mentioned that I grew up in Missouri. Actually, I grew up down in the Ozarks of southwestern Missouri, and that's good Bible Belt territory. And some of my very good friends in the Bible Belt don't like this when I mention some of what is not an exorcism. But exorcisms, sometimes you will have an evangelistic meeting. Used to have tent meetings. Now you will have many revivals in the local church. And the evangelist comes in from outside and holds the revival. And at the end of the service, they'll have the altar call, and there will be somebody comes down, and the evangelist will put his hands on the person's head and declare he's cast out a demon.
Mm-hmm.
I have great reservation about whether an exorcism has been performed. Those quick fix exorcisms, occasionally they are for real, but they usually are not really an exorcism. It may be a true conversion to Christ, but it is not what you would call truly exorcising or driving out a demon that has resided in a person's being. So that's really what an exorcism is not.
See a lot of that on TV evangelism, and I mentioned before to our listening audience on other radio broadcasts about some of these people casting out the demon of smoking, casting out the demon of overeating, or some of these things that we just consider these sins that could be kind of extreme, like chain smoking can. And that's where it just seems to just lose its credibility, because there's no symptoms of possession. And they do it with a microphone. Everybody stands in line. If there was a spirit of such, it has no problem with them standing in line waiting for their turn, like during a line at Burger King. And that's just despicable the way that it's a mockery, too. And then they happen to use the word exorcist and exorcism. By your definition, exorcism are it's considered to be the Roman ritual, and deliverance is when it's one of these lesser methods. Is that the way you view it too?
Well, I think the best way to understand how I view it is to get into a clear explanation, a detailed explanation as who is qualified to do an exorcism. Do an exorcism? Can just anybody? Can anybody be an exorcist, or is there training? And are there such things as certified exorcists and things like that? This really kind of gets into what is an exorcism and how they should really be performed.
So when we get back, me and my lovely wife will continue our interview. And thank you for joining us, and we definitely want to have you back for more.
I'll be right here. I'll be right here.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back. A little short commercial break to give us a little bit of time to recollect our thoughts or whatever that we require. Anyway, we're back to our guests and Dr. Bradshaw.
What is a real exorcism? How does it happen?
Okay, let's move forward with that.
The first thing that we need to realize that an exorcism, for the most part, most exorcisms will take any place from 1 to 5 days, and may well take into a period of a week or 10 days, but usually 3 or 4 days will do an exorcism. Now, what you have to do is to have a team of exorcists. So before you have an exorcism, you have to select an exorcist that appears to be acceptable to the person being exorcised. An exorcism is a little bit like treating an alcoholic. If I have an alcoholic friend, I'm not able to say to somebody else, treat my friend. That friend has to come to the place that they realize they need treatment, and therefore will do something to solve their alcoholism. The same thing is so with an exorcist. I can't just say, I have my daughter or my son or my uncle or whoever has a demon, please exorcise him. No, that doesn't work. The person has to have gone through counseling and talking and coming to the conclusion that, yes, I am possessed, and yes, I need that help. And so once that decision is made, then another pre-exorcism decision that has to be made is, who is the most logical person to perform the exorcism? Mm-hmm. And so you have a lead exorcist. But in almost all exorcisms, you will also have a backup exorcist on the team, because one exorcist may approach the exorcism in one way and have a certain impact on a demon, while another one will do a little different. And so you have a lead exorcist that starts out, and if he's making good progress, you stick with him. But if he's not, then you bounce off to the second one periodically to have them see what progress you can make with the exorcism. Now, you will have then on the team a lead exorcist and a second exorcist. Then this person is going to have to be cared for, and so you have a caregiver whose responsibility it is to see that the person who's being exorcised will have proper meals, will get the needed rest, and every night the team is going to go into a team meeting to decide what has been accomplished today and what should we try to do tomorrow, and that person has to be watched and cared for, so you have at least one caregiver who is going to be taking care of that person when the team is not engaged in the actual exorcism. You will need a spiritual advisor, usually a priest or a clergyman, who is trained and equipped to work with the exorcism team to identify what spiritual progress is being made. You will have a medical person who is actually there because exorcisms can be very traumatic and very dangerous to the health and welfare of the person being exorcised, so you'll have a medical person. Now, these people, and this is what becomes very difficult with an exorcism, have to agree, if I'm going to be a member of that team, I've got to set aside anything else that I'm doing and be with the team day and night until that exorcism is completed. And it's not easy to find the clergyman who will do that, the priest who will do that, the layperson, or the medical advisor, the psychologist, or the medical doctor who is willing to forsake his private practice for that length of time.
Especially
so you first get this team in place. And they meet several times and decide the best way to approach with what they know, and they've all studied what this person has gone through in the past months or years many times, but especially in the past months that have led up to the decision, yes, it is important to try the exorcism, and now it's time to do the exorcism. And you find a safe place to do this, and a place where the team is able to reside and work in privacy, and a place that is safe for the people involved. Many people will remember the film The Exorcist, which was filmed back in 1973 or 4, someplace back there. The closing scene of the film, when the exorcism is successful, but the demon's last thing is where he grabs the priest and throws him out of the window, and the priest goes to the ground and falls out of this 3-story window and is killed. That was Hollywood, but it had truth in it, because there is danger to the people who are performing the exorcism as well as to those who are being exorcised. So you have a place that is safe and secure, and that you feel that you can work in for an extended period of time. Then the night before the exorcism actually starts, you'll have kind of a private worship service. It's typical to have soft music. Maybe you'll have a guitar player who will be strumming. You will pray together. You'll sing together. Very common to have lighted candles and just have a quiet atmosphere that is kind of a sacred feeling, and it gets everybody into the mood, in the right frame of mind to go into this spiritual undertaking. And you always remember, and you have to constantly be reminded that it is a spiritual undertaking. And so then you start the next day with the actual exorcism. And it's an exercise, one after another, as to what will drive this particular demon out of the person. And many times it has to be to the place that what you're doing in the exorcism increases the faith of the person so much that the person is able to say, "Get out of me, I do not want you in me, I will not have anything to do with you." Now, demons are naturally afraid of holy water. Holy water, in the truest sense, water that's come out of the Jordan River in the Holy Land and has been blessed and set aside and dedicated for holy use. They are afraid of holy water. They do not like scripture reading. They do not like words of Jesus recited and spoken that tend to buoy the faith of the person who's being exorcised. So you keep seeing what works, and it's kind of like in the middle of a war. As you become more powerful, the enemy fights back harder, and you know that you're really making progress when the enemy gets desperate and tries to hang on. And so as the demon tries more and more mean and nasty things, and as the demon gets into the person and spews out these violent, nasty things that they're saying to other people, or they will cause the person to shake and tremble, and all of these fearful things, the more that happens, the more you know that you've really gotten to the demon. And so if you're going right along and everything's running smoothly, and you think, boy, this is great, hey, watch out. You are not having any success at all. You've got to see that reaction. So when you realize that, the trauma that this person is going to go through before it's all over is just horrific. And then when it's finally over and the demon is out, excuse me, the person literally is just completely exhausted, and they may need days or weeks to get a hold of their life and to be able to face reality again. And they also, one of the things you have to know is that demon may well come back and try again and again to get back into that person. And it's so terribly important that the person has good training, good counseling following that exorcism, not just by any person, but someone who is trained and has experience in counseling a person who has undergone an exorcism, in order to keep their faith up high, in order to continue to show them what a vile life it was before and what a cherished life it is now. Mm-hmm. So this whole business of exorcism just isn't understood by very many people. So that kind of gives you a quick summary of what an exorcism is all about?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who just want to wear this and sport the title exorcist. Maybe it's because it's a quick way to get to a sort of a rock star status because of the social networks such as Facebook, and it used to be MySpace, and it goes unchallenged. And some people have very active imaginations, and then they had not experienced real demonic possession. So it's kind of a rock star thing, and you have to really be careful. People will compliment you, and it'll affect your pride. Anytime you start to get some of those type of attributes, it'll affect your overall level of spirituality. And that's the characteristic that the exorcist needs to have at its strongest.
Well, today I really did get upset. I happened to be in the car and tuned in National Public Radio, and it just happened that they were interviewing a so-called expert in demon possession, and he had just written a new book. And some of the things that he was saying and some of the answers to call-in questions were so lame, I could hardly believe what I was hearing. And it just, here was a person who had read up on exorcism and was a good writer and wrote a kind of neat book, and now they were an authority. And they didn't know what they were doing at all. It just made me heartsick and a little angry.
Yeah, because such individuals will be on radio shows, and by their word, you'll find out that they don't know what they're talking. But the notion's still out there, and it's partly a denominational one, and that's they say that all ghosts are demons, as opposed to some of them being human spirits that are minions of demons. And in the Catholic Church, we refer to minions. Could mean helpers, it could mean human, could mean inhuman spirits to the main ones or the devils. And so I know it varies from denomination to denomination, but you seem to be very diverse in understanding, such as holy water, which is not a very universal thing in the Christian churches, and Orthodox, and some of these understand it. But how do you address the topic of ghosts?
Well, one of the arguments that or one of the things I point out, not argue about, but point out to my paranormal friends is that there's a lot of difference between a ghost and a demon. A ghost is the spirit of someone who has lived an earthly life, has died, and now for some reason has a spiritual influence. That's a ghost. A demon never had any human existence of any kind, but has always been a spiritual creature and never any human form. And there is that difference between the two, and they need to realize that there is that difference.
That's a great definition too, because it says, for some reason, we have to put that variable, that equation in there to say that there's so many reasons. And some people will cling to the one reason and say, there are no trapped spirits. Well, a trapped spirit or whatever. I mean, Catholics call it purgatory or unfinished business between here and heaven. Like you didn't get something right, you need to get that finished, or worldly attachments or whatever. But bring it into the next thing. Finding an exorcist. I was telling people in one of my books that if you go to the Catholic Church, don't use the word exorcist. We're finding out we shouldn't even use the word deliverance. Our ministry is called a healing ministry, me and my wife, which within 2 years is going to turn into an organization ministry instead of just referrals to the church. We avoid the word deliverance, and part of it's that's because maybe TV evangelists have kind of tarnished it. But exorcisms, I told people, don't go to church, ask for an exorcism. Ask for spiritual healing, and then let them come there for themselves. I think we had lately a possession case where a priest went over there, and he just performed a blessing. They didn't ask for an exorcism. It's like, invite the priest over. Let them have dinner with you. And then ask them to bless you, and then if something happens, like the lights flickering on and off, and and a chair moves 6 feet across the floor, you have a witness there and a priest who can go to his bishop, and you're already halfway there in the red tape. So in this, I'm just asking you, tell us about finding an exorcist who might qualify to get the job done.
Contrary to what a lot of people would think, and I'm not a Roman Catholic, I'm a Protestant, have always been a Protestant, but there's no question that the Roman Catholic Church has done more than any other religious organization in the world, in the history of the world, as far as the study of demonology and of demons. Many people don't realize, for example, that the late Pope John Paul II issued a papal edict that required every diocese in the world to have a qualified, trained exorcist. Will people say, does every diocese have? Of course not. There are some small dioceses that can't at all, but they have a connection with a larger diocese that will have the availability of somebody who is qualified and trained by the church in order to perform exorcism. Then along comes Pope Benedict XVI, and he furthers this study and sets up special commissions and appoints some special priests working out of the Vatican to further train priests in the proper procedures and training of exorcism. And now we're not quite sure what Pope Francis's position will be, but it simply shows that in the Roman Catholic Church there's this long history. And as I mentioned earlier, there's this written diary or a written record or written transcript of every demon possession exorcism that is authorized by the Church. And so the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, has been very active in doing this. And when somebody says, well, what should I do if I suspect? I say, first check with your own denomination and see if there are really any qualified people who are trained, certified exorcists, or if not, then go to the local diocese and let them know what your problem is. Now, they say, well, will they give me the name of an exorcist? No. You will not get the name of somebody who's going to perform an exorcism, but they will take the information, and if someone in the church believes that it is a legitimate problem, a possible real demon possession, then you will be called back. And they say, well, why don't they just connect me right off? Well, because there would just be so many quacks who are constantly saying, well, I'm demon-possessed, I need an exorcism, and this type of thing. And so they're very careful about giving that information out. And the good exorcist does not make his name known. You will find it's very difficult to get the name of an exorcist or someone who's trained to do exorcisms out of the church. You just and the well-trained exorcist does not give that information just because it's private and they don't want to be bugged by every body in the world that thinks they may be demon-possessed. So I'd say go to a local diocese, even though you're not Catholic, and see what help you can get.
That's one of the things we're trying to work towards in ours, and I think we're going to be in a good place within 2 years, even more so. Cross-denominational help. You know, that if someone calls the office down, they're not Catholic, they get scrutinized. What is the name of your parish priest? Which parish you in? They'll say, oh, I'm not Catholic, and then it doesn't go so far.
Yeah.
And it's because partly they don't have anybody to call. So me and my wife came into there under their new bishop, and since I've been out, I took a break because of life ordeals for the last 5 years. In the meantime, we changed bishops, which is good because the other bishop wasn't very accommodating on spiritual warfare, such as many priests. which is kind of a question in itself, that it's that you can't expect the same results from one archdiocese to the other, and I find that disturbing. So I don't know if, you would think that as organized as the Roman Catholic Church is, for example, that you would find more things straight across the board, but you don't. It seems that even state to state it can vary as much as the archdiocese, so that makes it even harder.
Before your program ends, and this may sound self-serving, I don't mean for it to be, but I want to call attention to my website.
Oh, definitely.
That's great.
The book,
my website is www.williamb, as in boy, williambbradshaw.com. And on that website, you're going to find that I have written 3 books. But the one that you really want, as far as this program is concerned about, the one that they want to look at is Sinister Among Us. Although it is a novel, it was written as a 101 course on demonology. And everything that I have said here tonight is going to be in this book. And it is a novel. Every incident that has happened in this novel has actually happened. I know for a fact that it has happened. I've changed names and locations and occupations and all kinds of things, but every incident in this book has happened. And I put it in the form of a novel because you might not remember all about demonology, but you'll remember the story, and it is a mystery, and you don't get the end of it until the very end. But it deals with this problem: is the person really possessed, or is the person just ornery and mean? And I encourage your listeners, if they're really interested, to try to get a copy of that book.
Great, based on true stories.
Yes.
So it's a compilation of several cases. So it's a case study, and then we take it apart sometimes on radio or in blogs, saying that this element, no, this isn't true, that wouldn't work that way, that's totally false, that's a very realistic account and visual portrayal of that type of encounter. So we use movies a lot of times. I think that we're going to try to focus on it one day in the future, maybe even make a docudrama that entails true elements, just to try to use that as an education tool. Besides the fact that my wife has acting in, behind the camera and in front of the camera background, and we got this really great video equipment and a lot of connections. We may try to go that one, even if it just goes straight DVD, to make a docudrama that portrays a story that has several elements and shows the whole process of finding out the person is haunted or possessed, all the way to the final stages that solves the problem and gives the reality of the situation. That's pretty much what the book is kind of revealing, too. It's very telling about the before, during, and after.
It will cover everything I've talked about tonight.
Great. Well, we do want to have you back on, definitely, because we scratched the surface on one topic, but there's a history. There's a number of questions that I would specifically ask. We'll just say we'll call them mythologies about exorcism and so forth that people have actually asked straight up, or they've said in books.
Sure.
But we're going to compile a list, and we're going to do another productive show and just talk about the topic in general. The website, again, is
www.williambbradshaw.com.
And your book is also available on Amazon?
Yes, you'll if you just click on the picture Sinister Among Us, it shows you it has direct links as to how you can purchase a book. You can get it from Amazon, you can get it from Barnes and Noble, you can get it directly from the publisher.
Great, Dr. Bradshaw.
You'll probably get the best price from Amazon.
Well, we can't thank you enough for spending your night with us.
It's been a real pleasure, and I wish you the very best with your program.
Thank you, sir.
Well,
God
thank
bless,
you, Doctor.
and we're going to be emailing you and pestering you again soon. We promise.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have a good evening. God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Bradshaw. God
Yes,
bless.
good
Have
night.
a good night.